All right, we are now kicking off our second portion of the programming, which sort of shifts gears a little bit from an art therapy specific lens to a more artistic lens. And so joining me today is an artist that we're featuring here today, Priyanka Ram, who is an artist based in LA with a background in advertising. And she's here to discuss her use of traditional painting to critique our current digital culture. She's interested in how the emotional qualities of shapes, colors, and tones in the digital space can be explored through artistic media in the physical space. So thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So just to start us off, do you want to give us an introduction to yourself and to your work, the main ideas that you want to point at?
Sure. So I think just as a background, I've worked in advertising for 18 years, and then I went to art school in my 30s, and I've come back to it to support myself. And so the reason I'm mentioning that is that I started in advertising when it was still print and radio and outdoor ads, and so I was starting with writing radio ads for Church's Chicken, and there was a very specific way of trying to talk to an audience, through these more analog mediums. And then by about 2006, 2007, I started working at this ad agency in New York, and it was the big digital push came. And there was this phone called the Motorola Crave, and in our creative brief, they're like, you got to breathe the iPhone. And that was our whatever. But regardless, that put me on the path of having to rethink how to interact with an audience through buttons and a web page and a landing page that has a certain hierarchy that things have to move through. So it became this completely different sensibility of talking to people, right? And then through that over time, and the funny thing was that was 2006, 2007, and so many of our campaigns or briefs were get people to trust the internet, whatever. And within 10 years, we're already here where we're doing everything online, right? And so to the point where that's part of our language and lexicon is these shapes that are on a web page, which are rectangles that look a certain way and banner ads that look a certain way. And so after going to art school and then kind of working back in advertising more remote, I just started to get worried. And I think it's
What are your main concerns?
I would say that this standardization that we're staring at, for many hours a day on the screen, through a screen, I am afraid it may have numbing effects, And yeah, I'm not trying to just be conservative in this way, it's numbing or it's bad for your brain or whatever. I think there's a ton of value in the digital, and I recognize it, but I'm also curious about the aesthetic space in it, how it can sort of be a little weirder, goopier, textural, and what sort of information does that actually activate in a person, and how can we think through how our body moves through space to then create digitality and apps that take advantage of that, and someone
move
earlier
a little more like we do.
Exactly. Someone right before in this talk right before was talking about an app called Envio. I'm not sure what this is, but yeah. But the way she was describing we used to deal with qualitative data I could cut and paste things, and there's a certain way you want to look at it and interpret information. But sometimes when you're on the digital, it can feel frustrating that you can't activate those same, more efficient ways of how your body moves in physical space.
Cool.
So, yeah, how
Those
can
are the
you
big
think
concepts.
through that?
All right.
Okay.
I'm going to shift gears just for a little bit because I
Cool.
know you have your work here.
Sure, yep.
And I want time to look at the work and for you to talk a little bit more specifically about how your work relates to these concepts. And I think it's interesting that you are talking through the paintings about the digital world and then wanting to somehow connect the digital back to the corporal. So if you can kind of move us through those spaces, starting off with your paintings.
Cool, yeah, for sure. a few different things are happening, and I'd say I'm like at the beginning of exploring my language of the things I'm trying to do through this, right? But in some like larger sense, maybe this carrot that I'm after is like how can I conceptualize an internet that feels more like nature, right? So like the bumpiness that I was talking about and how we physically but then through these paintings, the way that's being expressed, it's like, so that little weird thing over there, it's like I'm thinking about like iconography, and like working in advertising, I'm constantly next to graphic designers that are on vector-based like Illustrator things, like creating these icons, and like now we've really relied on the digital for like icons to navigate and like be a thing. But so I'm coming up with my own icon language, but I also have a issue with a repetition icon. So I'm curious about, can there be variability within a control or an icon? So it's like this thing that looks like a floppy disk or something strange. There's like texture in it, and like what. So on one website, if you have to navigate 3 different things, could there be one that's like texturally drippy, one that's texturally like mountainous, one that's like whatever, So.
And then this repeats in your other painting here.
It does.
But there's a grid.
Yeah, I'm like really uncomfortable with this painting at the moment. Like still trying to like deal with it or whatever. But I think part of what was happening here is, and why I introduced this grid, or what I'm thinking about through the grid, is the grid represents this like objectivity or like an armature or a way of organizing the world, right? So I'm like,
including on the digital.
Yeah, especially when now you try to take phones and stuff, you have that aspect ratio situation, like so this is being so how can I get like expressive subjectivity? How can this sort of expressive meet objectivity in sort of an organized way, and like
that's why the overlap with the grid
exactly
and
like
a very
focusing.
landscape.
Exactly. So back to that idea.
Can you talk about this?
That's like if there was a website for screen breakage and it's called Shatter. Like those shapes are actually based on 2 broken pieces of plexiglass that are just like over and over, whatever.
Hypothetically speaking.
Right. So could this be like a website that you navigate through, like a little bit more mysteriously to find information? The other thing I'm trying to achieve is like this idea of how can we slow down in the digital, meaning we're not just like consuming these sort of empty calories of time and digitality, but like how can it be more difficult to move through or just like stickier in that way that standing in front of a painting or looking at fine art is like, it's more of a decode journey that can slow you down and make you absorb. So
beautiful. Well, thank you. We're going to have your paintings up for a bit, and of course everybody can check in with Priyanka if you guys want to hear more. I'm going to plug your Instagram on the chat, so if anybody here tuning in wants to follow Priyanka via Instagram, ask her some questions more about her paintings or look at some of her other work, feel free to do that. Just check out her Instagram on the chat feed. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate this.
Yes.
It's fun.
Cool. All right.